Now, we saw just in this last election here in November, Iowa has historically been kind of a purple state, and now we are sweeping red. How do you think that's going to impact Iowa in the next election here in 2024?
I do a lot of work with voter numbers that every month I look at the voter registration statistics. And in fact, even once or twice a week, I get an opportunity to see what the current changes are on a regular basis, given some of the work that I do. And one of the things that I always tell people is that Iowa is still a purple state. We're still a swing state. And the reason for that is that the three parties, Republicans, Democrats, and the no party voters, again, that's what Iowa calls its independents, are pretty evenly balanced. And in fact, up until the primary in 2020, no party voters were the most numerous and had been for 20 years, as far as the data that I was looking at goes back. There was a big change in the primary, the COVID primary, the pandemic primary, as I usually call it, because all the voters in the state were sent or at least all the active voters were sent a absentee ballot request form. Again, because of the pandemic, you didn't want it to minimize in-person voting to try to keep spread of the disease down and so forth. And so a large number, something on the order of 60,000 no party voters decided, oh, okay, I'll go ahead and participate in the primary for the Democrats or the Republicans. So their numbers dropped below that of both parties. But it was temporary, and they're building back because about half of the voters, new voters that register every week and every month are no party voters. A lot of those are young folks, so they haven't really made up their mind yet. Maybe they feel it's their civic duty to go ahead and register, but they aren't sure what party they want to join, so they say no party for now. And then over time, they usually pick a party, either because they joined a particular caucus or just because they like some particular candidate or party. So right now we're at a point where the Republicans have the lead by 60,000 or so voters over Democrats, but Democrats and no party voters are about even. In fact, if you include the Libertarians actually became an official party here after the 2022 elections. But if you throw them in, include them with the no party voters, that now they're ahead of Democrats. And so essentially, we still have a situation where you've got about a third Republicans, a third Democrats, and a third independents. And so those independents, they're the ones that decide the statewide elections, whatever they happen to be, and also pretty much the ones in the congressional districts as well. Maybe a little bit less so when you get down to the smaller state house districts and so forth. But they're the ones that candidates really have to reach out to in a general election. And so right now, the pendulum seems to have shifted to the Republican side. As you indicated, that we have, and in fact, in presidential elections, I'd like to remind people that Iowa went for Obama in 2008 and 2012, but then it went for Trump in 16 and 20. And so it swings. It's those voters that swing from one side to the other. Now, right now, the pendulum seems to be on the Republican side. We had several statewide offices went for Republicans, including two long-term incumbents for Democrats were defeated. You had a congressional member that was defeated. The seat was flipped to a Republican. You had Republicans gain seats in the state house and the state senate. But at some point, that pendulum is going to swing back. Those no party voters maybe will get tired of Republicans, or the issues will change, or whatever it happens to be. And so it's possible that it's going to swing back. So I will still argue, even though we seem to be leaning on the red side of purple at this point, that Iowa is still a purple state, still a swing state. And the key are those no party voters. Now, let me expand on that one little bit here, and you can maybe chop this up if you need to. One of the problems for Democrats is if they abandon Iowa and the Iowa caucuses are a tremendous party building event, not just on that night, but that year that goes ahead of time, where they have people out there talking to people, trying to convince them and so forth. And if we don't have that focus, then it's going to hurt Iowa Democrats. They aren't going to have that ability to build the party in the same way that they had in the past. And one of the concerns that the DNC had was the competitiveness of a state. And they would look at it and they would say, okay, Iowa's a red state. They would make that conclusion. Again, I think it's an incorrect conclusion, but that's what they were thinking, because it tends to be Republican at this point in terms of some of the races that have won. But they basically are saying, by the Democrats abandoning the Iowa caucuses, they're almost saying, well, we're just going to let Iowa go. We're not going to compete here as hard anymore. And that's something that the folks in New Hampshire Democrats have said the same essential thing, that basically they feel that the DNC is abandoning them. And basically you would have potentially two states that were swing states, Iowa and New Hampshire, that may end up in the red column on a more permanent basis.